Greetings and salutations. This is Abe Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask a hell of a lot of questions. You can also become a bitter pill at patreon.com/The Bitter Truth. And you can also access the show via all of your usual suspect platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, name it, and we're on it. So there's that. My guest today is the author of If You Can Keep It, Why We Nearly Lost It and How to Get It Back. He's also a member of the faculty at the Foundation for Economic Education. He's also a founder of the Blue Republicans for Ron Paul in 2011 and 2012, which the amazing thing there is it was a coalition of mostly Democrats. So, again, a bunch of folks that probably saw past their usual coalition bias or confirmation bias speed lane or little food train speed lane. Robin Koerner, are you there?
I am here. It's good to be with you, Abe.
Excellent, man. I'm great to have you on. I'm glad we finally were able to do this. So let's talk. Let's get in a little bit. Obviously, I let folks know kind of about your book and kind of a little bit of what you've done. But let's talk a few minutes about kind of where you came from and how you got here.
Oh God. Well, where I came from originally was a little city on the south coast of England, which is why I have this strange British speech impediment. And I originally came to America, if I go all the way back to when I decided, well, no, when did I came to America with the view of staying in 2004, and it took me a meager 12 years to become a citizen. But before that, I discovered I wanted to try out for America as it was, because I was chasing a woman from where I was living at the time in Taiwan to California, which was where she was living at the time. And that is a long story. And the love affair with her didn't last, but the love affair with America evidently did. And here I am.
Wow. Okay. And I can relate to that story. And I think we've all chased a chick at one point in our lives. I think we all have.
It's the rite of passage.
It's the rite of passage, right? At one point you don't get to hold on to your junk if you didn't chase a chick once, and and we all want love, right? Isn't that the truth? So I wanted to talk a little bit because just to get, there's some things that I wrote down specifically, but I wanted to get into what I saw on your website, which I thought was pretty unique, especially the way you have a take on it that's different than most people. The political, your idea that political differences are cultural differences, because we like to think we're so neutral. We like to think that, all my politics don't have anything to do with my background or blah, blah, blah. And I don't completely believe that, but you had a really unique way of kind of talking about that, at least on a couple of videos that I saw on your website. Why don't we jump into that a little bit?
Okay, yeah, definitely. Okay, so this is actually something that I do discuss at a little more length in my book, which you kindly mentioned. So if anyone's interested in where this discussion goes, there's kind of more where that came from. And there's also more about this on my website too, which is just my name.com, robinkoerner.com.
Okay.
So where to begin? So the claim isn't that all of the things that are political that we believe are basically determined by our culture or that bit of the culture in which we have grown up. But the claim is that many, many more than we think are. And most of the things that we believe politically, if they're not completely determined by, they're largely determined by our, if you like, our biography and what we have experienced. Well, what we have experienced and what we have experienced as normal. One of the articles that I wrote about this, for example, was called "Your Problem with Guns or Gays is Not Political." That's
an awesome title.
I was pleased with that, yeah. Which is just as well, because when you're a writer, as I am, I've written hundreds of articles. One struggles because, you can put in days or weeks of work into an article, but that 50% of the success or failure of it is the title. So when you get it right, it helps.
No, I'm a big fan of titles. I've written a ton of essays, and to me, you get the title, the ending, you're golden. And I'm a big fan of titles. I get it.
All right. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. So, so this is I was considering these issues. It was written a few years ago. So the gay marriage issue was a big thing. Gun rights was a big thing, as it always is in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine let's pull the gun rights one to start with. If you are brought up, let's say in rural America, where all the good people in your life had a very comfortable relationship with guns, you know viscerally, instinctively, that they would only ever be used to defend the family. That the people who had them did not have a cavalier attitude towards violence or anything like that. Imagine that you used to go to the range once a month, or maybe out into the field with your dad when you were 8, 9, 10 years old, and maybe you're doing that with your own son, right? Now that's I've kind of described a bit of a culture that bears on how you feel about guns. Let's just leave it there. Now imagine, in contrast, you're an urban progressive. Maybe you live in the neighborhood I live in Seattle. Maybe you have never seen a gun. You've certainly never touched a gun. Now, I should say, by the way, in this example, I can relate to the latter, not because I was born and bred in Seattle, as you can hear from this accent, and as we mentioned, I come from England. But in England, of course, guns are anathema, right? So when I came to the United States, the idea that people would have guns for whatever reason, talk about like way out, right?
Right.
So I can imagine what it's like. I'll tell you how it first feels. To think about someone that goes to a range and, let's say, spends time enjoying himself with something that was designed to kill people. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're born and bred in England, and perhaps, like I say, my current neighborhood of Seattle, you can't even imagine what kind of a person would get any pleasure out of that.
Right.
You can't imagine what it would be to be comfortable with something that implies so much violence around children with your children. So right. what there really is here is a visceral, at the worst, the word is disgust, right? But it's a visceral sense of it. One of the things I talk about in my candidate training, etc., is in a way, all politics are the politics of identity. This kind of cultural gap is where is really a massive identity gap, by which I mean, I so don't identify with that person. So, I'm the English person looking at the rural American with his guns, that I can't imagine how he experiences the world. And I certainly don't trust the moral motivations that determine how he responds to his experience of the world. Right. So there is a gulf. There is a deep, visceral, sometimes suspicion, at worst disgust, that means that, that we then seek to justify. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And I don't think we seek to justify it consciously, because that's not how it works. I mean that, and I go into the neurology of this even when I kind of give training about this and do instruction about it, that our rational mind is really the tool of our subconscious pre-rational mind in creating justifications for judgments we already have. Now, we experience ourselves as believing the things that we believe for the reasons we think we have for believing them, which is why you get into a Facebook argument and, if you want to change somebody's mind, you trot out all of the reasons, the logical reasons, the conscious reasons, the rational reasons, and the facts that you have that justify your position. What you don't realize is you came to that position for a number of reasons that are not in that argument at all. The reasons like the ones I painted the picture of, right, with the two examples, the Englishman or the rural or the urban Seattleite versus, the rural gun-toting American family. Mm-hmm. So, and unless we understand how minds are really made up, unless we understand that the process of judgment and opinion formation is nearly all subconscious and unconscious, and that our conscious reasons for our positions are fitted post hoc. Unless you can understand the actual judgment formation process and the difference between it and post hoc justification, you can't hack that process. And if you can't hack that process, you can't find the common ground and the unity that a lot of people in this country right now say we sorely need. And you certainly can't change the minds of other people on this issue, because you're not speaking to that, in the example of the guns, maybe that visceral core sense of disgust that actually, or suspicion, that isn't verbalized per se. Right? What's verbalized per se is the post hoc justification, but not that visceral source of where somebody stands. And often, in nearly every case, people do not know why they believe what they believe.
Well, that was my next question. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but isn't that sort of, doesn't that belie itself in their answer? I mean, some people will, whether you agree with them or not, will at least come back at you very neutrally with some facts and this is that and the other, and then, or they'll come back at you with a very visceral, hateful response that has nothing to do with the argument at hand or nothing to do with any facts at all whatsoever. Isn't that answer sort of belie who they are?
I would say actually no, because this visceral, you can actually be a very calm, let's say intellectual, detached person on the gun issue, and you can come, whichever side of that issue you're on.
Sure.
You can have a discussion with somebody and be quite cold and factual and rational without actually understanding why the facts that you're bringing to bear on that discussion are the ones that you originally chose as most relevant. And I wrote an article to unpack this whole thing called How Facts Get Chosen and Minds Get Changed, because what we do is we talk past each other all the time. Now, your question is, usefully pointing out the difference between someone that is at least having a calm, rational discussion and somebody who isn't and just comes back with emotion. And absolutely, there is a gulf between them. But what I'm saying is, even the first person usually thinks that those facts, that argument, is the one relevant to the issue for reasons of their culture and their biography that they're not consciously aware of.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, it just...
In other words, there's a famous quote, right? You can choose your own... What is it? You can have your own opinions, but not your own facts.
Right, 100%.
Right. Except that, although it's true as far as it goes, like the point being that there are real facts that don't care about, what your opinions and your feelings.
Sure.
That's true. But as a statement of how we actually form belief, as a statement of what we now know about psychology and neurology, it's utterly useless. It's false.
Well, see, and this is
using their own facts.
Well, this is something I say all the time to folks: is the facts are there. It's just our philosophy we disagree on. So if you have a fact that has in history or what have you, now it's just about kind of I guess what you're saying. It depends on who I am and what my philosophy is, and how I view that piece of history. I still know people that think that, the problem with Vietnam was the media reported it wrong. Not the fact that we were there illegally, not the fact that we were killing, 4 million civilians, none of that. And that people would have a problem with it and that the middle class was loud about it because they were getting drafted. That's not an issue at all. It's the media's fault. And it's their response. It's their fault. That's why, we lost Vietnam. Really? Okay, because the media lost us Vietnam. But but the facts that I just threw out there, Gulf of Tonkin was a lie, and who we killed, et cetera, et cetera. But how we approach those facts, I think it depends on your philosophy. It depends on who you are. Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah.
I mean, and I'm saying it operates at a very fundamental level. So this is, for any of your, listeners who maybe are interested in Jordan Peterson, he's got a big following right now. He talks about how all reasoning, but also all perception is motivated, right? And when it comes to politics, our motivations, which are determined by those visceral feelings, by the relationships we have, by the opinions of people that we already trust and respect, by the team that we identify with, et cetera, determine which facts we even perceive. And we know now neurologically that, in fact, we've known it for more than half a century, we've done experiments on this, that what you already know determines what you perceive, actually changes your sense data to reinforce what you already know, even if what you already know is incorrect. And that is a shocking thought, because it kind of makes you go, okay, well, all bets are off then. And what I'm saying, everybody has to work really hard to work out why the facts that they see and they think are relevant are the ones they think are relevant to an issue.
Well, doesn't that get to your other point? And I'm not sure if you make it in the book, but I've seen it, on your website, for example, judgment and justification.
Right. So judgment and so this is what I was getting at earlier. Yeah. So the process of judgment formation As I say, it's driven by all these other things. What is at stake? What is motivating your reasoning and the facts that you notice when you think about an issue? And as I say, the things that and we can talk about what drives that, but they're largely cultural. They're largely subconscious. You don't end up at your judgment or opinion about a complex issue through a logical argument. But you experience yourself as so doing, because as soon as you make your judgment, like almost instantaneously, your conscious mind is engaged in providing the argument providing the facts.
Okay, it does make sense. You are making sense, but so I want to throw something into the works because I finally got exonerated and won a few bets that I'm very proud of. The Mueller report, yay me! Now. I'm seeing journalists, live grown-up people with educations and Rhodes scholars like Rachel Madcow and people like that are still hanging on for dear life, even though other indictments of other things may be coming, because we know that the orange one is not exactly above board. However, I don't care if I like him or not. It's about what's right or what's wrong, in my opinion. And to me, the taking this country through Russiagate, you may as well have started Watergate all over again, because it was 2 years of McCarthy red baiting, saber rattling a nuclear power. And now that we're not going to indict anyone on that issue, not the rest of it, just that issue, these people can't let it go, man. And so to kind of get to your to kind of speak to your point here, people confusing opinion for fact, they're still confusing opinion for fact. And Rachel Maddow alone, forget CNN, who's actually fired producers. There must have been 15 or 18 gotcha moments that came and went. The walls are closing in. It's all over for this presidency, blah, blah, blah. And then the next day, oops, yeah, well, and not even retract the thing from the week or night before. And then now this has come out, and she, talked for 30 seconds and then went right back on it. Well, but what if it is true? Well, what if I'm Brad Pitt? What if my abs are better? What if I have my hair back and I'm well read and I have $1 million? Who the fuck lives on if? That is the great big beautiful lie. If and should. And so when you talk about this, and I know I'm throwing you a softball, and you sound better with a British accent than I do saying this shit. So continue and go right on. So how this is a simple example of exactly what you're talking about to illustrate it for folks. Is it not? I'm going to say yes and no. This is the entire first chapter of my book, actually, which I simply called Mediography. And the reason I say yes and no is, right, what the media is always doing is reflecting back to Americans, let's say, the paradigm that Americans live in, right? Culturally, political, whatever. Right.
What the stories they give you are, it's like this. It's like you've got, do you remember those things you did when you were a kid, join the dot, and there's dots on the page and you make a picture out of them?
Right.
Yeah, right. So when it comes to something as complex as our national politics, the thing is, it's like there's only 5 dots on the page, but people are drawing these really complex things through the dots, and they're coming up with completely different pictures, right? And now, so you've got that going on, and the picture that the media is going to draw through the dots about any issue is a function of the political and cultural paradigm, and I can say what I mean by that we live in as Americans, but also to the examples you're giving, the sub-paradigm of being an American progressive in the 21st century, or a Democrat, or a Republican, or a conservative, or a Trumper, or whatever it is, right?
Right.
So we think, we're all participating in this illusion that what the media are doing is telling us the facts on the ground. No, they're not. They're not telling us, here are the 5 dots on the page. What they're doing is drawing this big picture, the narrative by analogy, and telling us that story. And they will even, because they're operating with a political intent and also an intent to make profit, and they have an audience they have to play to, right. If they have to shift those little dots on the page, then they'll shift them too. So the reason I say yes and no is that, yes, the media are doing all of what I say, that they suffer from the same problem because, the media is just a bunch of people making decisions and putting out information that they are processing. So they're humans like the rest of us. So they have
That's a lot of credit you're giving the media. That's a lot of credit you're giving the media, but continue.
Well, but then I was going to go on to say, right, precisely to that point. But then they also are doing something that is more, if you like, consciously subversive. Clearly, if you think that there is any American media outlet, I mean, with the exception of C-SPAN on a good day, right, that is actually interested in ground truth. Right. Rather than making money, that's an easy one,
sure.
Or whatever the political agenda is.
Right.
Then obviously, I mean, this isn't going to be news to you, Abe, or any of your listeners. Obviously you're barking up the wrong tree. So you've got the fundamental problem I was talking about before, and then on top of that, the problem of actual just blatant bias and an agenda that is not about truth.
Right.
I've got a little meme that I put out a while ago. I put out a lot these days as I try and expand my social media. And it was just truth before tribe, and that's what I'm about. That's probably what you're about, Abe. But, there are so many people whose existences, whose livelihoods depend on, their tribe. And that tribe might be MSNBC or the audience of MSNBC.
Oh, no, I understand. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I know you get it. So, yeah, so you've got these different layers operating.
Well, I mean, and I've had that experience with people I try to get on the show. I know some lawyers, some prominent attorneys, some prominent psychologists from my days back in the day. I was involved in some stupid media thing, and and I tried to reach out to them for the show, and talk to them, and they're like, yeah, you know what, man, I'll lose Twitter followers if I get on your show. I can't say that. I can't talk about that. I agree with you, but I'm a so-and-so attorney. I get on these different stations talking about true crime. Those true crime people are not exactly progressive. They're not exactly open-minded, and one day I said something about Hillary Clinton. I lost 600 Twitter followers. I was like, whoa. And, they're like, yeah, so good luck, but I can't come on.
Yeah, and that's a good story to tell, because it really shines a clear light on the clear decision that everybody has to make.
Right.
It's like, are you on the side of truth, or do you have something that is more important to you than that? Mm-hmm. And most people, the fact is, most people do have something that's more important to them than that. And that's a damn shame, because that really goes to people's integrity. But and I understand why people make that decision.
Well, they got to eat. They got to. They got to pay the bills. I have a day job, or or I wouldn't be eating. I mean, that's just this show supports itself more or less, but not in the millions of dollars by any stretch. And so, if I didn't have a day job and I had to worry about those things, absolutely, 100%. I can respect. I think I can respect that choice and allow somebody to rightly claim, perhaps, that they're maintaining their integrity. If when they make such a decision to, let's say, withhold their truth so that they keep a job, they at least are honest about having done so. Right.
I think that's the minimum requirement for integrity.
Well, see, and that's the thing is like, okay, so for example, this person in question, they're not out there spinning a different story. Most of what they talk about has nothing to do with some of what we're talking about. That doesn't bother me. It's the people that know better. And so if I'm a guy, basically a loudmouth with a mic who, interviews people, if I know this, and I knew for 2.5 years that this Russiagate thing was bullshit, and I kept asking for facts and people just kept tisking at me, oh, you poor dear, whatever. And you're like, well, don't be a dick. Tell me why I'm wrong. Because so far what we have seen is XYZ, no proof, a lot of theory, but not fact. But they are so attached to it because they hate this. He's stolen their critical thinking skills, Donald Trump. And fuck their integrity. They're going to keep pushing this narrative, even though the reports come out. It's over. It's done. You just got handed a long-form birth certificate. Move on. And they can't do it, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, this in that first chapter of my book, I talk about this experiment called the Perceptions of Incongruity experiment that was done in Harvard in 1949.
Okay.
And when I'm teaching candidates what I call the art of political persuasion, this is one of the first things I explain. I tell them this experiment, and I think it's really relevant here, so bear with me.
Yeah, no.
What they did was, the scientists, now this is 1949, they showed playing cards to the participants in the experiment at high speed, and the participants had to call out the card that they were seeing, right? So pretty simple. 3 of clubs, 7 of spades, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what the participants didn't know was that after a few minutes, the cards they were being shown had the colors switched between the red and the blue. So, for example, the 9 of hearts was black, or the 3 of spades was red. You with me?
Yeah.
And they were just inserted in among the regular cards. Now, what did the participants call out when they saw those cards at high speed? Well, if you see a black 9 of hearts, if you're shown a black 9 of hearts, because you know, assume that you're working in a, let's call it playing card paradigm, and you know what the playing cards are, your knowledge determines your perception. And you actually physically see something that isn't there. You see, instead of a black 9 of hearts, you see either a red 9 of hearts or a 9 of clubs or a 9 of spades. And that is what these people would report. And the interesting thing about that is that you will notice that what they know changes their data in a way that reinforces what they know, which is we're looking at a bunch of playing cards, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got all paradigms being kind of sticky and self-reinforcing. Now, interestingly, as the experiment goes on, they slow the rate of showing cards down. And the participants are all hooked up to basic stress measuring devices. So back in the late 40s, you're looking at simple things like heart rate, sweat on the skin, right, which indicates stress. And what the experimenters found was that while the subjects, the participants, were seeing something that wasn't actually there, physiologically they were showing signs of stress. So their body is reacting to this situation, and their mind is trying to make the data match what they know. Now, eventually, as I shouldn't say mind, I should say brain to be more accurate. But eventually, as the rate at which these cards are shown is slowed down enough, of course, people realize at different points what's going on. Hold on, that's not a real card. That's a black 9 of hearts, right? Now, in that moment, they are now out of the playing card paradigm, and they see actually what they're being shown. The stress disappears immediately, and their world has changed. Changing a political mind is like that on a very large scale. So, and we can talk more about how it is that we change data and how we even consciously would explain to ourselves how and why we did it. We can talk about that. But that's kind of at the most basic, a phenomenon that goes on for various good reasons of actual survival. Actually, if you go back to the kind of evolutionary psychological aspects of it. Sure.
Well, I always tell people, my personal theory based on a psychological thing I read once in college was, you're kind of done by the time you're 23. Who you are, what you value is pretty much done by the time you're 23, but your views change all the time. I was a pro-life religious kid until about my early 20s, getting into my mid-20s, and then, I was like pro-life, and now I'm pro-choice, right? So I got out of religion entirely by the end of college, and just not a day, because it was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. But when I decided I was done, I was done. I was really done. And it doesn't mean I don't value honesty. It doesn't mean I don't value truth, and doesn't mean I don't value love. It doesn't mean I don't value those things. It's just I didn't see that as being a source of those things, right? And so where I sought to get those things, different places, but who I am as a person, will I pick you up at the airport, kind of thing? Am I gonna fuck your wife? Probably not. I still believe those things to be, what good people kind of do or avoid doing. So, but the point of view, my views have changed dramatically. Ron Paul is the first non-party guy I voted for in 1988. I was 25 years old, and the reason I voted for him was because I saw a Democratic field of some talented guys, and they went with Paul Tsongas, with Michael Dukakis, and I was like, wow, this is a fix. That guy's going to lose. It's rigged. How do you go from Bob Kerrey, who's a one-legged Vietnam vet, who's sleeping with Deborah Winger in the governor's mansion? I can't invent this. This guy's a fucking hero, right? Economics professor, knows some shit. Nah, we're going to go with Michael Dukakis, the little dweeby guy in the tank. Okay. And then Ron Paul was saying all this stuff. I was like, yeah, I want to add the Fed. That's a great idea. I'm like, so I voted for him. And with a couple of exceptions in the last 30 odd years, I've pretty much voted for either green or libertarian, depending on who it is and what they're doing, what they're saying. And, with a couple of exceptions. In 2008, I was scared shitless of Sarah Palin. And so I voted for Barack Obama just in case. And even though I knew he was lying to me, I wanted to believe. And I was, kind of like people that voted for Trump. But yeah, man, that's it. I mean, what do you say to that? You just got it. Your views do change. I agree with you 100%. But who we are as people, I don't think does. I mean, I think people have more guilt. Like some of the integrity issues you're talking about before, I think people have more guilt about what they're doing than, say, for example, somebody who is maybe a sociopath. I don't know.
Oh, I mean, sure. I mean, I mean, if you're saying there's a spectrum along which people lie with respect to, let's say, their commitment to truth and the value they put on being a source of it, for the rest of us, that's for sure. And there are some people who you might say are on the pathological end of that spectrum, as you say, sociopaths, psychopaths, whatever it might be. Yeah, that's true. And I think you make a good point about how our nature is a lot of it is sealed. I hesitate to use that word, but is sealed early in life. I mean, there are lots of things. I mean, according to the best science I've read on it, which is a little old, let's say with respect to sexuality, that are pretty much determined by the ages of 4.
100%. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, and I and if I look back on my life, I have been through some massive system shock and step changes, but I certainly recognize, if I go back to when I was 23, the person I now am, and certainly my core motivations, my deepest drives and commitments that I have now, I can recognize them entirely in the person I was when I was 23. Right. And I think that is very, yes, I think that's very common. I mean, I think you're right.
Well, and then kind of back to what we were talking about the media for a hot second and what they focus on, what they choose to tell us. For what I've been seeing online and in some news, like when I don't really watch news except for homework now because I have to do this show, so I should see what they're saying. But sometimes I'm at a bar and I'll see the subtitles because I'll have the subtitles going on the television, and I'm like for example, Joe Biden, right? They're trying to trot his ass out again. And they're zeroing in all these women coming forward. He kissed me inappropriately. Like, that's the least of that guy's fucking problems, man. Why don't you tell us the truth about his background, how he wrote Patriot Act in 1994? And, is it amazing to anybody that within a week of 9/11 we had a 3,000-page bill that just came, and we're gonna vote on it before we read it. We don't know what's in it.
Ready to go.
And it came out. It was a 7-year-old bill that Joe Biden wrote. That he coined the term super predator in the crime bill. I mean, that's where Hillary Clinton got that language. He was horrible to Anita Hill. Completely, ran her over the coals unjustly. Those are things that should be, presented to the media, not another. Okay, so what? He got caught teabagging a stripper, or he rubbed some chick or nuzzled her ear. Do I really care? I mean, the guy's like 80 years old. You know what those guys used to do back in the day? Nuzzle a chick's ear in the office in the 60s. You ever see Mad Men? It's the same fucking thing. That's not news, And so when you say they choose to tell us these things, this is just one example. But and also, as I honestly believe, it's because the Clinton Communications Act in 1996 allowed the media to avoid antitrust and basically consolidate to the point where 5 companies own everything you and I see, read, hear, buy, listen to on the radio. I mean, so they're not. I don't know if they're choosing it as much as they're assigned it. Is that too conspiratorial thinking and paranoid?
Well, I mean, I would certainly say that the processes, the laws that govern, this domain, have a huge effect. I mean, that's true. And again, also to go back to the point about culture. What has been the case for a long time sets expectations and norms, which basically are the culture, which determine, what people do and what organizations and media corporations do, right? You've always got this cause and effect kind of feedback thing going on. That's the way things are. I mean, it's interesting to me because I was born British, and I was in my 20s when I first started spending a lot of time in the States, chasing that woman I mentioned.
Right.
And this is true. I'd never sat down and read a British paper in Britain until I came to America, and I kept going through the TV channels looking for actual news. What I, as a Brit, knew world news was. I couldn't find world news.
Right.
And so I started going to, I was in California, so would just start going to a big bookshop every now and then, maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks. And I would take off, the foreign newspapers, and I'd sit and read the British newspapers to get some news. And that's not because America doesn't have truth, doesn't have the means to put it out. It's not because of any of that. It's not because people in Britain are smarter or care more about truth than Americans. It's not that. It's just that there's, let's call it the news culture or the public information culture, for reasons of history and law, et cetera, is so different. And so it produces so many different things from what you get in England, and what people expect and demand in America is so different from what they expect and demand in England. And the thing is, in so many things in life, what you've never had, you don't miss, and you don't know you can have. Whereas I did know that I could have a whole different way of consuming news because I came from a completely different, cultural paradigm and media paradigm.
Well, and you're being kind. I'm American, so I'll just go ahead and say it. The American public has a short memory, and corporations, they never forget. So we've been fed bullshit our whole lives. We're like mushrooms. They feed us shit and keep us in the dark. And unless you go look for it like you did, like I did. I mean, I used to read the LA Reader in the 80s to get anything on Central America because I wasn't getting it on the news. And my dad's an Arab. And so my first introduction to, it's not like what it seems, my dad's Palestinian specifically. So every time we'd see something on the news, he'd give me the background. Well, what they're leaving out is there's this guy named Mohammed Mossadegh who got overthrown in 1953. And that's why the Shah got overthrown now, because nobody likes him because he's a dictatorial piece of shit who kills a bunch of people. And you're going, okay. And so I didn't know about Mohammed. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, this is a great point. I'll let you finish because you're illustrating a very fundamental point that I also make in my book. And so carry on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no. But I mean, so understanding that, when I was a kid, I was 14, 15 years old, trying to assimilate. I mean, I was born in the States. Me and my cousin's brothers were born in the States, but you still got the foreign parents, so you're trying to assimilate. So the last thing I needed to hear was, fuck, what, really? This Mohammed guy, really? Was he really president? Are you making this up? I used to do that with my dad all the time. And then I get to college and I get this poli-sci professor going, yeah, there's this guy. And I'm going, oh, really? So my dad was right. And the other thing he said was interesting that I refused to acknowledge was that the hostages in the Iranian embassy were CIA. And I'm like, no, that guy's an accountant. No. And my dad's like, okay, then why did they let the Marines go? Why did they let the accountant go? Why did they let the chef go? They kept everybody that was CIA. 1991, CNN does a big whatever became of the hostages piece. And underneath every one of these motherfuckers' names was ex-CIA, ex-CIA, ex-CIA. And I'm like, 12 years later, I'm going, God damn it, my dad was right again. I was so pissed. But that's the kind of thing where, we have this bias to find, like you said, to stay in our lane in what we know. And Americans on the whole, not all, I'd say a good 20% are probably like you or I, that they really want to see, they're not like just going to say what's happening. They want to know what's really happening. And they don't just watch, the garden variety news. I was getting my stuff out of the LA Reader and the LA Weekly before they got co-opted by corporations in the 90s. When the internet came, I discovered BBC, the British BBC, not the American BBC. When the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour meant something. And you found real stuff. Now the last thing on mainstream television is Democracy Now! And that lady's Amy Goodwin's going to get her ass chopped off because they're going to cut her funding pretty soon because she's bringing on Noam Chomsky and everybody else and getting the real boots on the ground news of Venezuela. Oh, can't have that. We want to instigate a coup. We just lost 8 fucking wars: Libya, Syria, Iraq, and now we want to go into Iran and Venezuela. And Americans don't even know that we lost those endeavors. 18 years. Why are we in a forever war getting our asses kicked? Why are we sending more kids? To confirm what? Patriotism? It's another great, big, beautiful lie. I mean, so anyway, that's just sort of where I come from. I come from a different bias. And then I remember when I was in college, I had a marketing research teacher make us subscribe to the Christian Science Monitor for the whole quarter. And that was 1985, 86. And that was a different set of news that I was getting from the LA Times. Yeah. And I was like, whoa. We had a couple of these African guys that were from Africa in our class. And they would give you their version of what was going on over there or what we did in the Congo And this is like 20 years after Lumumba. And I got guys in my class going, well, if you don't like it, then man, just go back where you came from. And that's like half the fucking Americans in this country. You know, they're proud of not knowing any more languages than English. You know, and I hate to bag on my country, but I like my country. I like living here. I love what we stand for, but we got to reconcile our psychosis with our ideals, and we seem to not want to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I mean, to the general point, the thrust of what you've said, one of the things I say in that chapter in my book, in my the first chapter, I talk about media and how it basically reflects to us what we already believe, not the actual facts on the ground. I also, in my way, make the point that I think you were making there, which I think is so important and people don't think about enough, which is, I put it this way, for all of the reasons that you've highlighted, if you have enough time to be watching the news, don't watch the news. Go and read a book, right, about somebody that actually researched the thing that the news is telling you a story about. Because, again, specifically to your point, the media is always going to do, if you like, the easy thing, which is to look at in putting the story together, they're going to draw if you like, the simplest picture through those dots. They're going to give you supposed causes of things that are seen rather than unseen, because they're the easiest to see, right? And are the nearest in time or space, because again, they're the easiest to notice. But again, as your brilliant examples show, right, in nearly every case, the most proximate visible causes for a thing are the least relevant to why the thing's happening and what that thing means and what it's going to cause to happen because of the big train of causes and effects that it's a part of, and you can't know that if you can't, it's like, you don't know what you don't know, right? So stop watching the news and thinking their version of the story is the story and then the story, because you don't, because everything, everything that matters, everything that's kind of complicated enough to even be political, to have consequence on the world stage or even on the scale of a community, there's always more to it than the news will tell you. So either you don't know anything or you go and do some research to actually find something out. Watching the news doesn't mean you go from not knowing anything to knowing something. In fact, it can actually be, especially if what you've got is, MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News and all of this, the American corporate media, it can actually take you away from the truth because it causes you to believe you know something, which is actually wrong, right? So at 100%. Least just knowing that you don't know, well, there's some accuracy in that, let alone some humility. So no, you make a very good point, Abe, and frankly, if the country knew that, if that penny dropped, I mean, this is a fantasy, but if that penny dropped with the majority of Americans overnight, everything would change. The
100%.
Would change, the world would change, the politics would change. They wouldn't have to actually make any other decisions. Just realizing that would change the world.
Well, you make an excellent point, because there's a friend of the show I've had on a few times, and I quote him incessantly. A guy named Chris Ward. He's a vet for peace. He was in the service. He served in South Korea, served in Kosovo and stuff. And one of the things he says that I just love, he says, one of the things that makes me so mad is when people say, well, I saw it on the news. And he's like, yeah, I was the news. You're reading what I faxed to AP and Reuters after the Pentagon and the CIA approved me to fax it. So, I wrote it. It's like, this is, when people say that, he's like, and I would watch the news. I'm, hey, wow, how cool. They put my thing on there and like verbatim. And it's the way they wanted it said. You know what I mean? Like when last fall when Trump wanted to get out of Syria, and everyone was freaking out, and all the military talking heads, which are basically paid defense contractors, came out. Well, that's a mistake. And really, the mistake that Obama went in there after Congress voted against it? You mean that mistake? You mean the illegal war that because of Patriot Act 2, he can now say Al Qaeda, and he can invade Austin, Texas if he wants to, or now Trump can. You mean that mistake? So it's a mistake for Trump to want to get out of a thing that we weren't supposed to be in the first place? It's insanity. But we keep pitching the Patriot thing, and I keep telling people all the time, listen, read 1984 every other year. I was force-fed it in high school, right? And then I get in college, and about the end of it, 22, 23, I read it again. I'm going, Jesus Christ. I've been reading that book pretty much every other year for the last 25, 30 years. And it's a short book, and it's not like I'm a genius. But it's the same point over and over. We get told what they want us to think. We're not told how to think. We're told what to think.
That's absolutely right. And I like that you brought that up too. I hate to keep talking about my book, but 1984...
Please, I brought you on to talk about your book, so continue.
Well, okay. Well, I appreciate that. Actually, 1984, the lessons from that, the introduction to the book is a riff on 1984.
Okay.
It's basically, I basically take some of the, let's say George Orwell's concerns as my starting point. And here's something really interesting about 1984, and this is kind of the thrust of the introduction and the thrust of, if you like, why I bothered to write the book that I wrote. In 1984, it's this. As a reader, it's a dystopian novel. It's awful. The thing being described is horrific, but you don't completely lose all hope until you discover that Winston, the main protagonist, is no longer able to freely think. You discover that his final freedom was the freedom to think truthfully and honestly, right?
Right.
They take that away. They take away his ability to see things as they are. And once he concedes to seeing things that aren't so, right? And this is what we've been talking about the whole show, that there is no chance he or, the rest of that society can ever come back from the oligarchy, can ever get all of their political freedoms back. Right. And the point I make in this introduction is, what Orwell's trying to tell us is all the while you have freedom of thought, that's the last freedom they can take away. That's the very last one. We've still got that if we want to exercise it.
Right.
But we've got to want to exercise it, and it takes some work. We've still got it. There are countries where, even that, has been threatened, if not, taken away to all intents and purposes.
Right.
But we can still do it as Westerners, thank God, right? So you only lose all hope and all freedom once you give up the exercising of your ultimate freedom, which is your freedom to think and to tell the truth. So, which goes with thinking, as anybody who's read On Liberty by John Stuart Mill will, know and remember. So, yes, absolutely. And, one thing, just pulling out some threads from our discussion here, one thing that was interesting to me is that when, after Trump got elected and all the, a lot of folks on the left went apoplectic. Sales of 1984 spiked, right? Because, and it was mostly among progressives who thought they were going to read in 1984, about the fascism that Trump represented. But actually, Orwell, and I've written quite a lot about Orwell. If you go to my site, you can. I grapple with a lot of this in some of my articles. One of which is called "Political Scientism: Beware the Enlightened Ones." Orwell took more issue. He warned more of his own side. He was a self-declared international socialist, right? Than the conservatives. And when you actually read Orwell back in the 40s, on why he was more scared of his socialist political colleagues than his political opponents, who at the time, if you like, were the conservative imperialists. Right. Let's say at least the Tories, right, of mid-century Britain, who were his political opponents. He was more scared of the socialists. And it was for these reasons. He says that, he's explicit about this, 1984 is about this, that the ultimate tyranny, it's not fascism. It's not a political system. It is, and he calls it this, orthodoxy. And orthodoxy he defines as not thinking, no longer needing to think.
Right.
And that's what that book is about. That Room 101 is so horrific because that's where Winston begins to lose that final safety valve, right, when it comes to your liberty, which is your ability to see things as they are, say things as they are, and think about things as they are. Because if you can see you're being tyrannized, you can do something about it.
Right. Well,
if you can admit it, you can do something about it.
Well,
but when you give up, you've got all bets are off.
Can I say that last part again?
But once you give up exercising that right, that ability,
right,
to see what's really being done to you, to find out what is true, then all bets are off. Then you have no hope of getting your liberty back, anything.
Well, it was that freedom of choice that got him to the barn with Julie in the first place. You know, he got the note, "I love you, meet me at," and then he meets her in the little square, and then she slips him the note where to get to the barn so they can have sex. And it's as base as that is, because sex was illegal basically in that culture. As base as that is, that was an exercise of freedom of thought. He hated his existence, and once they got him in room 101, they just beat that out of him. It's like and that's the thing is when Obama won election 2008, because I remember when the Iraq War was happening, people protested. Romanticizing like it was Vietnam. Obama comes in, does his little victory lap, goes to Egypt. Okay, we've been bad actors. We're going to be better. And
that's right. Yeah, I remember that speech.
And then within 6 months, he's back at it. He's back at it. And we got out of Iraq because of a timeline. Then we got back into Iraq. And then we used the same failed strategy in Libya. Yeah, we support the wholesale slaughter in Yemen. And everybody was asleep. I remember when he dropped the bomb on our hospital around 2014. Got in a huge argument with a friend of mine. I go, "That motherfucker." She goes, "Oh, no. It must have been bad coordinates. He would never do that." I go, "Do you realize how long we were already bombing at that time, 3 years. Do you think that our bombs are just, we write Christian democracy on the side of our bombs and we drop them and they build churches and houses and hospitals and they give hugs to kids? We've been dropping a fuck ton of bombs for 3 years and now it's 8 years. And people just want to, when you say that he dropped 26,000 bombs on Syria in 2016, people lose their fucking mind over that. They don't want to believe it because they can't believe that one of their own, right? And Orwell got shot in the neck in Spain, fighting fascists. So when he came back and wrote 1984 and then Animal Farm and then 1984, you're sort of going, okay, this is a firsthand account of what he has seen, bias or no, and people don't want to see that on their side. I got in a discussion with a friend of mine last night, and I had a couple of beers. Maybe I overreacted. But he said, "Oh, well, it's just politics. Leave it alone." When I was talking about the Democrats. And I'm like, that's kind of funny. If you wouldn't say that about a Republican, "Oh, he's just a pedophile. It's just politics." You wouldn't say that about a Democrat. You are a Republican. But if it's a Democrat, then it's okay. That's incongruous. That's disingenuous. You have to hold your people's feet to the fire like you hold the other side of the fire. It's what's right and wrong, right?
Yeah, no, it is what's right and wrong. And yet our brains are soft wired to not operate that way, so it takes effort to do it. And I refer folks to Westen's experiment in political psychology. Westen.
I was going to ask you that.
Which I think I also write about in my book.
Okay.
I certainly talk about it in activist training sessions I do.
Okay.
Where he actually when it comes to politics, especially people have got a lot of their own identity in their political views, right? So in other words, a lot of our political judgments we spoke about before are determined by all of these other motivators, right? As I say, the team that we already identified, the people we trust, the experiences we've had as a kid, et cetera, all these subconscious things that lead us to certain conclusions and not others. These motivations when it comes to politics I forgot my thread. I was gonna tell you something awesome about that. Draw a distinction between how motivated we are with politics and other things. What was the last thing you said, Abe? What was the last thing you said?
I was just talking about how it's not right when my side, or it's not right when my side does it any more than it's wrong when your side does it. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Yes. And so what Westen's experiment in political psychology shows us is, in the context of politics, if you give somebody, if you have somebody listen to a logically inconsistent statement, so something that is the logical equivalent of 2 + 2 = 5, and you scan their brain as they judge that statement, the parts of the brain that are engaged in judging it involve moral accountability, conflict resolution, right? Moral accountability with respect to the source of the incorrect statement. So Weston actually did this by putting a bunch of 30 people, half Democrats, half Republicans, in an fMRI brain scanner and pumped into, the audio, as it were, John Kerry and George Bush contradicting himself, each one.
Right.
And they was looking at which parts of the brain were active as they, if you like, dealt with, as they made the decision about what they were hearing. And in every case, the bits of each of those 30 brains that light up they're the emotional centers. I think it's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which actually handles logic and mathematics, right? Actual rationality is completely quiet. It's completely quiescent. Nothing happens there. What happens in the experiment, of course, is that the Democrats explain away Kerry's inconsistency whilst thinking that Bush's only goes to prove what they already believe about Bush, and vice versa, right? And that's because so much of our own identities and our egos are in our political views, our political paradigms. So, and again, all of this process is pre-conscious. It's all pre-conscious. So we all have a brain like that. So you can say quite rightly, it is incumbent morally on us to not operate like that. But there is a sense in which we're operating against our nature. We can completely do it if we decide to, but we have to decide to and go through the discomfort. It turns out when you explain away the inconsistency of somebody in your tribe, like Kerry if you're a Democrat or Bush if you're a Republican back then in 2004 when that experiment was conducted, you get a massive dopamine hit. It's basically, self-righteousness is almost a brain sensation equivalent of taking heroin. Yep. And I mean that in a technical sense.
Yep.
That's not a metaphor, right? Like, that's what you see in an fMRI brain scanner. So, yes, you're right, but it's not as simple as that. You're right about what we must do, but people have to decide to take on that responsibility for their own integrity and for the sake of truth and bettering the world.
No, I agree with you 100%. I mean, and you're right about the adrenaline thing. I feel it when I'm discussing something with somebody, not so much online, but if I get in a discussion with somebody and I feel, that I'm ready to, engage them and or, render a correction. Same thing. It feels like I'm going to get in a fight, even though I'm not going to touch them. It feels like I'm about to get in a fight. So it's a cycle. It's a very physical adrenaline charge. You feel it.
Yeah, and I would like to say that even stronger than that is that dopamine hit that you get when you have worked out why you were right all along. Let me put it that way. Yeah. We're working against.
Oh, absolutely, man. Well, hey, listen, man. In wrapping up, and really quick in wrapping up. So, if you can keep it, is the it what we've been talking about? Is that the it?
It is the Franklin quote. What have you given us, sir? A republic, if you can keep it. So it's the republic. It's our republic. So the full title. There's 2 books of that title, by the way, or maybe more.
Okay.
And so the full title is "If You Can Keep It: Why We Nearly Lost It and How We Get It Back." And it's obviously the one by Robin Koerner, because that's me, Koerner. And if you go to my website, robinkoerner.com, you can actually get a signed copy. If you go to Amazon, you don't get it signed.
Okay. Well, and I'm also going to put your link in the body of this show, so people can see it and click on it when they see the description.
Brilliant.
But folks, in wrapping up, my guest has been Robin Koerner, author. And if you go to robinkoerner.com, again, Koerner, robinkoerner.com, you can not only see a lot of very well-written, interesting articles, but also a lot of good video clips that take about a minute, so you're not that challenged. It's shorter than an episode of The Big Bang Theory. But guys, if again, patreon.com /The Bitter Truth is where you can become a bitter pill. We're going to be doing some more tiers this summer and fall. And again, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.